The Senate Foreign Relations Subcommittee hearing was expected to be just another normal day, routine questions, planned answers, nothing surprising. That's what the staff thought, and that's what the cameras were ready for. But everything changed when Ibrahim Traoré walked in, the 36-year-old president of Burkina Faso. Once a military captain, now a leader who had shaken up global politics. His bold and independent leadership had made powerful countries uneasy, but it also earned him respect. He was invited, not eagerly but out of necessity, by senators from both parties to speak about U.S.-Africa relations. The room was full staff, reporters, and policy experts, all watching closely. Traoré wore his military uniform, calm and confident, not bothered by the murmurs around him. At the center sat Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana, known for his sharp tongue and no-nonsense attitude. He leaned back and watched Traoré take his seat. Cameras flashed. Then Traoré began speaking with cool confidence. Africa's future is not something to be discussed in secret rooms. We don't need permission to reclaim what's always been ours, our land, our dignity, our voice. Kennedy raised an eyebrow and gave a smirk. He spoke into the mic. That's mighty poetic, Mr. Traoré. But let's get to the point. You've taken over American mining deals, kicked out French troops, and made it clear you'd rather partner with Russia and China than with us. How does any of that make you qualified to lead, let alone run a country? The room went quiet. Traoré didn't flinch. He calmly tilted his head and said, "Excuse me?" Kennedy leaned forward and said, "I'm saying you're not fit to lead. You're reckless. You're dangerous, and honestly, I don't see what makes someone like you qualified to even be here." The room went still. A few aides froze, and even the reporters looked up from their notes. Traoré didn't react right away. He calmly pushed his microphone closer and spoke in a quiet but firm voice. "Mr. Kennedy," he said, "a man who claims to defend democracy but mocks elected leaders of sovereign nations has no right to question anyone's fitness. You look at my uniform and assume I'm a dictator. I look at your voting record and see pure hypocrisy." Kennedy shifted uncomfortably. But Traoré wasn't finished. "You ask what qualifies me to lead. It's simple. My people chose me. Not a wealthy donor, not a lobbyist, not someone selling weapons. My people." The room buzzed with murmurs. One of Kennedy's aides tried to slip him a note, but he ignored it. Traoré leaned in. "Let me be even clearer. I didn't come here for your approval. I came to remind you we are not your subjects. This isn't 1960. Someone in the back whispered, "Did he just say that?" He had, and he meant it. Kennedy stared across the table, lips pressed together, clearly unsure of what to say next. For a man known for witty remarks and Southern charm, he suddenly looked out of his depth. The silence in the room was heavy, and Traoré let it hang, using the stillness as a quiet show of strength. It was the kind of pause that makes powerful people sweat, the kind that changes the mood of an entire room. A young senator from Vermont tried to change the topic, saying, "President Traoré, if I may redirect to the regional," but Kennedy cut him off sharply. "Let the man speak. I want to hear more about how he sees our country." His tone was a mix of challenge and damage control. Traoré didn't look away from Kennedy. "You want to know how I see your country?" he asked. "I see a nation built on bold ideas and powerful ideals, but also full of contradictions. A country that talks about freedom while supporting leaders who crush it, that sells democracy like a product but guards its own power like a weapon." Kennedy's smirk faded. Traoré went on, "You call me reckless. It wasn't me who bombed villages and called it stability. It wasn't me who used secret deals and puppet governments to topple leaders. I'm not the one who created the chaos. I'm the one cleaning it up." People in the room shifted awkwardly. A CBS reporter scribbled notes as fast as they could. Traoré wasn't just making headlines, he was changing the entire conversation. "I've never invaded a country for oil," he said calmly. "I've never supported a coup. My biggest crime in your eyes, I asked foreign companies to pay taxes. I said our gold should belong to our children. I refused to kneel." Kennedy finally looked away. That's when Traoré leaned in slightly, his voice lower and firmer. "I didn't come here to fight, Senator, but I won't be lectured by men whose wars cover continents and whose banks profit from human misery." The room was dead silent. Even the C-SPAN camera zoomed in slowly. Kennedy cleared his throat and said, "You seem pretty comfortable insulting your hosts." Traoré responded without missing a beat. "I'm not your guest. I'm your equal." That line hit like a bell ringing through the entire chamber. The mood shifted instantly. This wasn't just a hearing anymore. It was a reckoning. Tension hung thick in the air. Committee Chairwoman Diane Clark, an experienced lawmaker with a nose for political moments, looked up and scanned the room. "The session was meant to evaluate African development funding," she said carefully, looking from Kennedy to Traoré, "not to dig up colonial ghosts. With respect, Madam Chair." Traoré said, steady and polite, "Those ghosts are still here. You give aid with one hand while taking our resources with the other. That's not development, it's control." The room froze again. Traoré had said what few dared to say in the very heart of Washington. Clark shifted in her chair. "That's a serious accusation, President Traoré." He looked straight ahead and replied, "It's not an accusation, it's simple math. American companies made $12 billion from West African mines last year. Burkina Faso saw just 3% of that. And you call that partnership? I call it tribute," Traoré said firmly. Kennedy scoffed and replied, "You're oversimplifying global trade." Without hesitation, Traoré answered, "No, I'm clarifying power. Your deals are written in English, signed in dollars, and backed by force. My people sign with their land, their lungs, and their future." A few gasps came from the back of the room. A White House staffer glanced nervously at their phone. Chairwoman Clark cleared her throat and tried to steer things back on track. "Let's move forward. Senator Vance, you had questions about Burkina Faso's military budget." Senator J.D. Vance, sitting beside Kennedy, leaned in. "Actually, I'd like to keep going with this whole equality idea President Traoré seems so proud of. You say you're not a guest, but this is the U.S. Senate. This is our room." Traoré turned to Vance, calm and steady. "If this room only welcomes those who agree with you, then it's not democracy, it's theater." Vance gave a slight smirk and said, "Well, maybe a little humility would help your cause." Traoré tilted his head slightly. "I bring humility, Senator, but I do not bring submission." That line landed like a hammer. Chairwoman Clark looked like she wanted to wrap things up early. But with the cameras rolling, ending now would seem like retreat. Then Traoré said something that shifted the entire atmosphere again. "Burkina Faso isn't here to beg. We're not asking for permission. We're stating our position." Even the younger senators straightened in their seats. This wasn't what they had prepared for. This wasn't a polite request or a scripted statement. The world was used to African leaders speaking softly, asking for aid, hoping for trade deals. But Traoré had shown up not as a student, not as someone seeking approval, but as a sovereign equal. And now the room had a choice: argue, dismiss him, or truly listen. For a long, quiet moment, no one said a word. The Senate chamber, normally a place of control and predictability, suddenly felt unfamiliar, uncertain, and real. A visiting president had just challenged not only U.S. policies, but the very attitude behind them. And he wasn't backing down. Senator John Kennedy leaned in again, his southern accent sharper now. "Let me explain something to you, Mr. Traoré. Power is earned, not assumed. And from where I'm sitting, your country is trying to run before it even learns to walk." The comment cut through the room like a blade, but Traoré didn't react. He didn't even look at Kennedy. Instead, he looked past him toward the cameras, toward the American people watching live. "Power," he said slowly and clearly, "is often taken by those who mistake domination for leadership." Kennedy sneered. "You think you're a leader, leading who? Militias with leftover Soviet rifles?" That line drew gasps from the audience. This time, Traoré looked straight at him and replied, "I lead a nation that refuses to kneel, and that's more than I can say for leaders who fold at the first sign of pressure from their donors." Chairwoman Clark tapped her gavel gently. "Let's stay focused, gentlemen." But the tone of the room had already changed. Across the country, millions were glued to their screens. Social media lit up with hashtags like hashtag TRA or EACute claps back, hashtag Senate's howdown, and hashtag Burkina not begging. Outside the Senate building, protesters had started to gather, some waving American flags, others holding signs with Traoré's face beside the words "Respect Sovereignty." Inside, Senator Vance leaned toward Kennedy and whispered, "He's not playing defense. That's why everyone's watching." Kennedy scowled. "They'll forget by tomorrow," he muttered. Though he didn't sound convinced, Traoré went on, "I didn't come here to insult anyone. I came to shine a light. We're tired of being told the price of our freedom by those who've never had to fight for theirs." Chairwoman Clark looked exhausted. "President Traoré, I think it's time for a recess." Traoré raised his hand, not aggressively, just enough to pause her. "Let me end with this," he said. "Burkina Faso is not your experiment. We are not your failed state. We're not your moral charity, we're your mirror. And maybe that's what scares you the most." With those final words, Traoré leaned back in his seat, not as a victor, not in anger, but with quiet certainty. The moment wasn't just about a heated exchange, it shook the ground beneath a conversation that had been avoided for too long. 3 floors above the Senate chamber, inside a secure White House briefing room, a dozen top advisors watched the live feed in stunned silence. Aides scribbled notes. Analysts glanced at one another, and the president's chief of staff slowly turned off the screen. "Did that just happen?" someone whispered, not really asking, just reacting. Traoré had walked into the lion's den and left the lion looking outdated. Meanwhile, in the Eisenhower Executive Office building next door, National Security Advisor Paul Reimer looked up from his tablet. "He's not a populist," he said. "He's something else." "Arrogant," a younger staffer suggested. Reimer shook his head. "No, he's controlled, strategic. He came prepared for war, but he used only words. That's dangerous. That's real influence." Down in the Senate corridors, Senator John Kennedy had stormed out, dodging reporters with a sharp no comment before disappearing into a waiting black sedan. In contrast, Traoré stayed. He spoke quietly with 2 junior senators, 1 Democrat, 1 Republican, both meeting an African head of state for the first time. He answered their questions thoughtfully, not with ego, but with precision. He quoted James Baldwin, Thomas Paine, Frederick Douglass. He referenced the U.S. Constitution. He didn't act like an outsider. He spoke like someone who had studied the room and refused to bow to it. "You think he's campaigning?" Senator Richards whispered to her aide. "Because it really feels like he's campaigning." "No," the aide replied. "Worse, he's convincing." That night, CNN's Situation Room replayed the moment over and over. The second Kennedy snapped, and the second Traoré didn't. Pundits debated. Was he disrespectful or dignified? Did he cross a line or just draw one? But everyone agreed on one thing: he wouldn't be forgotten. And in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, crowds gathered around giant LED screens to watch the rebroadcast. Students cheered every time Traoré spoke. A young boy sitting on his father's shoulders whispered. He stood up to them. The father nodded, steady and unblinking. Back in Washington, Traoré sat quietly in a hotel suite with his translator and 2 aides. He stared out at the city skyline. Senator Kennedy looked powerful. One aide remarked. Traoré replied calmly, "Power looks like that when it feels threatened." Then he smiled. "And we haven't even begun." The next morning, inside the White House Situation Room, the president's top advisors gathered around a large oval table. The tension wasn't about war or economic crisis, it was about the unexpected impact of one man's words. Traoré's appearance yesterday didn't just defend his country, said National Security Advisor Paul Reimer. He made a quiet, forceful case against ours without yelling, without blame, just facts. The Secretary of Defense leaned in. He accused us of manipulating African economies, called our military bases the ghosts of colonialism, and said, Africa doesn't need permission to rise. That's not just optics, that's power. The president stayed silent, tapping his pen slowly before asking, "What's his endgame?" No one answered right away. Then Reimer spoke. He's building something, a story, a movement, maybe even a coalition, not just for Africa, but for the entire global South. And if he keeps creating moments like that, his voice won't stop at borders. He'll have support from Detroit to Dar es Salaam. A speechwriter glanced up. He quoted Malcolm X and Ronald Reagan in the same breath. "Who does that?" Someone from the State Department muttered, "A problem." Meanwhile, across D.C., Senator John Kennedy was scrambling to manage the fallout. His office released a formal statement trying to reframe the situation. Senator Kennedy remains a firm supporter of free speech and healthy debate. While the Senate floor can get heated, his commitment to American values is unwavering. But the statement fell flat. No one believed it. Worse, it was buried under millions of views of Traoré's viral quote, "The people you once ruled now read your history. We don't need your approval, we need your respect." That single line exploded across the internet. Millions of views, remixes, reaction videos, and commentary. Late-night shows jumped into. Jimmy Fallon joked, Kennedy questioned Traoré's legitimacy, and Traoré responded like it was the Harvard debate finals. On The Daily Show, the host laughed, "I haven't seen a senator get roasted like that since, well, yesterday." But behind the humor, something real had started to shift. On college campuses, students were debating power dynamics and the changing voice of the global South. In think tanks and policy circles, experts were breaking down Traoré's rhetoric, measured, sharp, and impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, conservative media was in full panic mode. "He embarrassed one of ours on live TV," a Fox News host ranted. "This guy isn't just bold, he's dangerous, and people are celebrating him." Back in his hotel room, Traoré rewatched the footage one last time. "Did we go too far?" his advisor asked quietly. Traoré shook his head. "No," he said, "we didn't go far enough." He turned toward the window, eyes locked on the Capitol dome. "I came to be heard. Now it's time to be remembered." In a dimly lit studio, a panel of political experts discussed the aftermath. "He's not just charismatic," said Angela Monroe, a former diplomat. "He's sharp. He didn't even raise his voice, but made half of Washington look unprepared." A conservative analyst rolled his eyes. "This is just another flash-in-the-pan radical. Give it a week." But the moderator pushed back. 12 million views in under 24 hours. A U.S. senator left speechless on live TV. That's not a fizzle. That's ignition. At the State Department, urgent strategy meetings turned tense. "How did we get him so wrong?" a senior official snapped. "We thought he was just another loud populist in a uniform. Not this philosopher warrior. Hybrid," another advisor chimed in. "Worse, he's positioning himself as the voice of a post-Western world. And people are listening." Across the globe, leaders from Brazil, India, and South Africa released carefully worded statements about respecting emerging perspectives. In diplomatic terms, that meant one thing: the world was paying attention and the balance was beginning to shift. They were siding with Traoré, at least for now. In Washington, Senator Kennedy wasn't handling it well. He canceled public events and dodged all press. When asked privately if he regretted his comments, he muttered, "I should have stayed in my lane." But the damage was already done, and Traoré, he wasn't done speaking. He held an informal press briefing at a hotel in downtown D.C., no podium, no teleprompter. Just him standing in front of a half-circle of reporters. "I didn't come here to insult America," he began. "I came because Africa no longer wants to be spoken for. We'll listen, we'll trade, but we won't kneel." A reporter asked, "What do you want from the U.S.?" Traoré answered calmly, "I want honesty, and I want the next generation to understand that dignity is not a gift from the West. It's something we've always had. We're just done apologizing for it." The room fell silent. Meanwhile, down in Louisiana, Kennedy turned off the TV without a word. As Traoré's words echoed across screens and social feeds, the storm didn't hit Africa, it hit America. On Capitol Hill, conservative lawmakers rushed to regain control of the narrative. "This man is not our ally," thundered Congressman Walters on the House floor. "He disrespected a sitting U.S. senator right here on American soil land. We gave him a platform." Others echoed the outrage, but criticism didn't only come from the right. Some progressives argued Traoré's tone was too confrontational, insisting that diplomacy demands humility, not defiance. But the real threat wasn't the criticism, it was the momentum. Clips of his exchange with Kennedy went viral under hashtags like hashtag TRA or acute truth, hashtag respect is earned, and hashtag new voices rising. Teenagers on TikTok began lip-syncing his now famous line, "We'll trade, but we won't kneel." Activists turned it into a rallying cry. The White House communications team was caught completely off guard in a closed-door meeting. A senior advisor whispered what many were thinking. We let a lion into the room and expected a handshake. Meanwhile, in Burkina Faso, the streets erupted with celebration. In Ouagadougou, crowds marched with signs that read, "He spoke for us," and not a guest and equal. This wasn't just about a Senate debate anymore, it was about recognition, pride, and long overdue validation. But Traoré, far from joining the celebration, remained calm and focused. In a private meeting with his team, he reminded them, "This isn't about ego. It's about dignity. We don't win by shouting louder, we win by standing taller." Still, the backlash began. Threats started to surface, anonymous messages, veiled warnings. A security agent handed him a phone with a brief, chilling text. "From an unknown number, you embarrassed the wrong people." Traoré simply smiled. "I've been embarrassing colonizers since I learned to talk," he said. "Let them take a number." That night, a CNN anchor asked the question, echoing across the globe. Has Traoré just shifted the balance of global diplomacy? No one gave a definitive answer, but inside embassies, think tanks, and boardrooms, that same question kept repeating. And in Louisiana, Senator John Kennedy sat on his porch, poured himself a drink, turned off the light, and muttered, "I never should have opened my mouth." By the next morning, the headlines were impossible to miss. A new global voice. Traoré redefines leadership on U.S. soil. Kennedy rattled. Traoré unbothered. Africa's rising star just schooled Washington. Major media outlets were split. Some hailed Traoré as bold, authentic, and unapologetic. Others warned his sharp tone could strain future relations. But one thing was undeniable: he was now impossible to ignore. At the State Department, officials scrambled in an emergency session, reviewing transcripts, video clips, and public sentiment data. One aide finally said what everyone was thinking. He just did in 1 hour what 10 years of diplomacy couldn't. He got Americans to actually listen. Across college campuses and inner cities, his name appeared on posters, murals, and protest banners. Outside a military recruitment center in Chicago, someone had spray-painted his now famous line, "We don't kneel." From Detroit to Dallas, activists were already inviting him to speak. A new movement was rising, but not everyone was applauding. In a closed-door meeting on Capitol Hill, Senator Kennedy addressed a circle of high-level donors and intelligence officials. "We need to stop pretending this is just about words," he said, his tone grim. "This man is building a brand on the back of our weakness. He's smarter than we gave him credit for, and that makes him dangerous." Meanwhile, in New York, Traoré sat quietly in his hotel suite, gazing out at the skyline. His assistant handed him a list of new interview requests: CNN, MSNBC, even Joe Rogan. He glanced at it, then set it aside. "I'm not here for fame," he said. "I'm here for balance." Rising from his chair, he adjusted his collar. "I spoke the truth, and they called it arrogance. But I saw it in their eyes, fear. Not because I was loud, but because for the first time, they couldn't control the story." His phone buzzed. A message from a South American diplomat read, "You've opened a door. We're right behind you." Then another, "They used to speak about us. Now they'll have to speak to us." Traoré looked out the window again, calm and focused. "The world didn't change last night," he whispered. "It just noticed who's been standing here all along, at the United Nations General Assembly." The chamber was silent, not out of protocol, but because everyone in the room sensed that something rare was about to unfold. Traoré approached the podium. No notes, no teleprompter, just presence. He scanned the audience, diplomats, skeptics, allies, and opponents. "They told me I don't belong here," he began, his voice steady. "Too young, too African, too different to lead any conversation about the future. But let me be clear. You don't get to decide who belongs in the rooms of history, in the American section." Senator Kennedy sat with his arms crossed, unmoved. Traoré didn't flinch. "Some of you wear the title of leader because it was handed to you. I had to earn mine through the fields, through betrayal, and through silence no one else would break." His voice sharpened, each word cutting cleanly through the heavy air. "You speak of global order. I've seen what your order costs. And I'm not here to ask for a seat at your table, I'm here to build our own." He paused, letting the words settle. "I don't hate America," he continued. "I hate hypocrisy. I don't resent wealth, I resent theft. I don't seek revenge, I seek repair." The atmosphere in the chamber shifted. Some diplomats sat up straighter, others avoided eye contact. "To my people across the global south, or to the youth watching through screens, to the forgotten, the dismissed, the ones who were laughed at, remember this. You are not guests in this world. You are architects of its future." A single clap broke the silence, then another. Within seconds, the room filled with applause, not unanimous, but strong enough to make the moment permanent. Traoré gave a single nod, stepped back from the podium, and walked off without a word. Outside, cameras flashed and reporters rushed forward. "Mr. Traoré, what do you think you achieved today?" A BBC journalist shouted. He didn't break stride. "Now they know I belong," he said simply, "and that's just the beginning." Then, with a calm presence that needed no spotlight, Ibrahim Traoré disappeared behind the line of diplomatic cars and security. But his words didn't leave with him, they stayed. They echoed through embassies, filled think tank discussions, rippled through social media, and settled deep in the hearts of a generation. This wasn't just another speech, it was a turning point. In a world where power is often disguised as tradition and arrogance hides behind titles, one voice broke through the noise. Traoré didn't just answer a challenge, he changed the rules. When Senator Kennedy questioned his right to lead, Traoré didn't raise his voice. He raised the bar. And tonight, the world watched as a man once overlooked stood tall in a room built to make him feel small. True leadership isn't inherited, it's earned through courage, clarity, and conviction. And if anyone still doubts whether he belongs, it only means they weren't listening, because sometimes the loudest answer is given in silence.